Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're doing our first installment of the weekly meta breakdown for Standard Best of One post-ban. So we had Fable the Mirror Breaker, Invoke Despair, and Reckoner Bankbuster all banned. Some cards that do see a bit more play in the Best of Three format versus the Best of One format, as Best of One tends to be a little bit more aggressive. But we did see Invoke decks being a popular archetype at the time. So we are going to go over this. I will record a best of three video, which will be coming out tomorrow. But we'll continue with our routine of just going through each of the formats, best of one, best of three, and then highlight the best decks. As always, the data is coming from MTG, what you see on the screen. Companion tool tracks win rates, loss rates, track your own data, and then it aggregates it into these stats that we see here. Link is in the video description if you want to get started. I will paste all these deck lists, including timestamps, so if you want to skip ahead, go to the deck of your interest. Everything's kind of archived in that manner, and we'll go from there. We are still trying to hit 10,000 by the end of June in terms of subscribers on the channel. We're closing in on 9,000, so if you haven't subbed to the channel, free, easy, goes a long way. At the very least, hit the like, drop a comment. If you're watching YouTube content for any creators in Magic, it literally costs you nothing to hit the like button. It helps with the YouTube algorithm, helps show your support for the type of content to help push things out. But we'll get started. We're looking May 30th through June the 4th. Platinum to Mythic rank, 130,000 games played. The reason we're looking at Platinum is because of the ladder reset. Everyone that was Mythic for the first week tends to be pushed down to Platinum. So there is a little bit more representation in the Platinum rank. Normally we look at least Diamond to Mythic, but in this case we are going to just be shifting the parameters a little bit larger in that regard. So we'll jump into it. I am still recovering from an illness, so I apologize if I'm a little congested or a little kind of slower to talk, but just trying to get over this. So the top deck is Mono White Humans, 66% win rate. And this is kind of a boost in terms of the archetype thanks to Copper Coat Vanguard. So 2 mana, 2/2, other humans you control get +1/0 and have Ward 1. So it's an aggressive human deck. You have your Hopeful Initiative, Recruitment Officers, a couple Skrelves, Honorary Humans, gnawing on the little paws of the human. It's kind of in here for protection and pseudo unblockable. Thalia for tax, Intrepid Adversary is your Lord effect. This version is just like super linear. It's like I'm playing creatures, I'm attacking in, we're going from there. The Intrepid Adversary is also nice because it can provide you some life gain in terms of the like aggressive mirrors to just try to get ahead. Adeline to make tokens. Peacekeeper is a tax effect. Brutal Cathar is your only removal in the main board. Well, I guess technically you have a Gancho. This version is also on the Knight Errant of Eos as some card advantage. Now, while it can be played like on turn 3 by just convoking or even potentially earlier, depending on how wide you go, I think in this deck it's turn 3 the earliest because you need at least the 3 creatures out. Adeline does help to push out some additional creatures as well in here. So it does provide some card advantage, which this deck usually lacks in some regard. I've played variations of this. I've also liked Archangel Elspeth. It really depends on what you're running into and the volume of removal. The Archangel does help. You'll see some decks are going to Sweepers main. So this is a way to kind of get around those Sweepers by still putting pressure. Mana base very clean. Plains, an Aganjo, and a Mishra's Foundry to get the job done. From there, we go to Selesnya Enchantments. This is a 64% win rate. So this is similar deck to what I got top 1200 with this past month. There's not like a clearly defined, this is the 60 cards you play. There's the aggressive version, which has been more recently doing better. And then there's the Hallowed Haunting version. So I made the switch myself to the more aggressive version. The more aggressive version's got your Kami of Transience, some numbers of Mashiko, Weaver of Harmony in here, and then some number of Audacity. This one is cutting down the lands a bit. I run 23 lands. It seems like they are trimming a bit, so they are leveraging like a single commune doesn't necessarily replace 3 lands. While most of your cards are 2 mana, you do have like some dependency on hitting to your 3rd land. You have your Weaver of Harmony. You do have some card draw in like the Spirited Companion and technically the Audacity, but something's got to die in that regard. I personally do like a little bit more lands. I think people think aggro, so we play 18 to 20 lands. That's not always the case. You do want to curve out. If you are not able to like multi-spell in a turn, it does have some impact at times. But like there's a couple different variants. There's the versions that are also playing the, what's it called? It's like brain fart. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? I can't find it now. It's the Afara battle. So playing 2 of those, it lets you tutor up Ossification or Audacity. So I've been playing 2 of those. It's been pretty good. In the shell, I take back what I was... Like some decks are playing 4 of. The 2 of is a good number there. Catilda helps with the lifelink, and then Calyx is a way to kind of put a bunch of counters on and then make copies of your creatures. I really like this deck. I think it's got a lot more lines than some of the more linear aggro. Like with mono white, you're just attacking in for the most part. The enchantments, like the sequencing of your spells. You know, are you playing a companion on 2? Are you trying to copy it? You have the boost here in power. You know, what's your 2-drop? Do you go Jukai? Do you go Kami? Like, there's a little bit more lines, which I tend to like in terms of my aggressive decks. Azorius Soldiers is the next deck, 63% win rate. Pretty much no change here with the set. You have your 1-drops and Recruitment Officer, Yodian Frontliner. Harbin's kind of your go wide over the top element. Resolute Reinforcements. Goes wide, you have your counter, your boost with the Valiant Veteran, Thali attacks, card advantage with Sky Strike, Siege Veteran for counters, Brutal Cathar's removal, and Myrel as the top end. While this deck does have, like, personally myself, I would play Azorius Soldiers over the Mono White Humans deck. I think it's a little bit more synergy in terms of, like, the Valiant Veterans. The Siege Veterans provides you a way to have like removal insurance. It also lets your creature scale. Sky Strike Officer gives you card advantage, and then Harbin's kind of inevitability by going over the top in terms of evasion. And Myrel's kind of a big beater if it goes unchecked. You have Anthem effects in your lands as well, so just a little bit more utility. From there, we go to Mono Red Aggro. So there's kind of 2 versions of Mono Red going around. This version's got the highest win rate thus far, but there's another version that's playing Invasion of Tarkir as a 4 of, and then some numbers of Shivan Devastator. The Tarkir is basically, think of it as like a Bone Crusher Giant. So you have Stomp, and then you have the ability to attack it if you'd like. It's a pretty good curve if you go like Swift Sphere into the Tarkir. You could attack it for 2, and then if you have like a Lightning Strike or just 3 damage the next turn, you flip it, and then you have a powerful dragon. This version's still on the squeeze, and Thundering Raiju's on the top end for some additional reach in terms of damage. 22 lands, reasonable number, especially because you have like the Devastator and the Bloodthirsty Adversary, so getting to 5 lands is not necessarily a negative in this particular build, but pretty stock red list. So our first kind of view of a post-ban deck, so mono black control, mono black mid-range if you would. So this is a deck that was previously a full 4 of Invoke. We've seen a lot of the decks turn to Gix's command. So this can provide you a sweeper against some of the more aggressive decks with like 2 power. If they also go just tall with a very large creature, you can get them to sacrifice it there. It also lets you recycle some of your creatures and then just give you a big lifelink creature until the end of turn. You have a lot of removal and cut down, go for the throat. Life of Toshiro can be used as like removal against early threats or like small threats. It can give you some life as well. And then it helps you ramp into the Gix command. You have Tenacious Underdog and Razor Slash. Both can be discarded proactively to Liliana to get you some value. Trespasser, life gain, and then just a difficult to kill body in the sense that they have to pay the ward cost. Sleeper as a mana sink, and then your kind of closers are your Archfiend of Duros. Big body makes your opponent lose life when things die. Sheoldred, we know this card's busted, and then a Sorin as well for some card advantage. Myrex in the mana base to kind of, if you flood, you can just keep making tokens and kind of pressure them in that regard there. So that one's just a shade under 60% at this point. So from here, we go to Gruul Aggro. This is kind of a base mono red deck, so I would call it like mono red Samut So you're basically playing Sumut, the Vizier of Naktumen. 3 mana, 2/3, first strike, vigilance, haste. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, if that creature enters the battlefield this turn, draw a card. So nice little card advantage engine. So you're taking advantage of a lot of the haste threats. So Squee, like the goblin, enters the turn, so you can draw a card. Squee itself enters, you draw a card. You have haste with like Iconoclast, with a kicker, Feldon, Bloodthirsty. All the creatures have haste. Even a flipped Kumano comes out nice on curve because you could go 1-2 Samut, Kumano flips, comes to the battlefield because it's a flip, enters that turn, and then attacks in and draws you some cards. So an interesting kind of take here in terms of an adaptation of the mono red deck in being Gruul. We then go to 5-color Domain, which is pretty much a Selesnya deck that like pays off in terms of Atraxa and Atali as your top end. By going Domain, you also have access to Herd Migration, both in terms of a closer to give you a bunch of beasts, but also to discard early, lets you find lands, and gains you some life against the more aggressive decks. There's a channel effect, or a discard effect, so it doesn't get taxed by Thalia, which is nice. You have interaction in Ossification and a full 4 of Sunfall Main, which helps deal with the aggressive decks. You have Leyline Binding as another way like to exile creatures, stuff of that nature. Ramp is in the Invasion of Zendikar and Topiary Stomper. A very powerful kind of curve is Topiary Stomper on 3, Invasion of Zendikar on 4. You play your 7th land then from the ramp that you get with these 3, and then the Topiary Stomper can attack into the invasion right away. You also have the full Archangel of Wrath package as another way to just deal a bunch of damage to small creatures, gain you life, and kind of close out the game that way there. So it's a very powerful deck. This deck can beat up on the Enchantments deck pretty hard. Just a bunch of exile-based removal can make it very frustrating. So having played a lot of the Enchantment deck, this is the deck I'd least want to play because my clock's typically a turn or two slower than the like mono red decks. And then this one can just bully it with like very cheap Leyline Bindings or the Sunfall. We then go to Esper Legends, 58%. So this is a deck that my opponent always seems to have their 2 of go for the throats on curve against me, but a very powerful engine built around Rafine. Rafine into lose lets you connive, puts a card under to lose, so when to lose dies, you draw them back to your hands. Rona is also another way to kind of draw and discard through your deck till you find whatever you need. It untaps every time you cast a legendary. It also plays very nicely with Shieldred because you can get multiple draw triggers per turn cycle and gain you a bunch of life. Dennick is a good life linker early that can grow. Thalia for tax, Skrull for protection. Like the big curves for them at times are Skrull, Thalia into Rafine to really put non-creature spells under extreme tax. Adeline for a go wide body, and then AO in the top end. Good pressure from it that also then allows you to, when it dies, find like more threats from your deck. And then lastly, we have Selesnya Toxic. Kind of the only configuration they went back to the Soul Transfer in the main. This is something that's been kind of fluctuating, whether or not they've been on the Soul Transfer. But your Rot Priest deck, the more aggressively slanted, where they are trying to deal toxic damage to your opponent, not necessarily just the kind of Simic variant of this deck where they just target the Rot Priest regardless. But you have Skrells, Crawling Chorus to deal damage, Annex Sentry as some additional removal that gets around like Lightning Strike, stuff of that nature. Bloated Contaminator as kind of your big chunker that pushes through damage, proliferates, gets those last few points of toxic damage potentially on your opponent. Skrell's Hive lets you go wide, plays around removal nicely since it keeps pushing out bodies, and then the aggressive matchups can also provide you lifelink as well. Seed Core and Myrex as utility lands in the mana base. So that's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing. Personally myself, I've been practicing for the Historic qualifier weekend, so I am practicing my best of 3 Historic games, but Enchantments is probably still my deck. I might switch to the 5-color Domain if I go back to it, but I like the Enchantment decks. I was always a big fan of Naya Ruins. I played a lot of those games as well. I really like like aggro decks that have some form of draw or just repeatable value, as opposed to just straight like, does my hand win on turn 3, yes or no? I like kind of decision points in my aggro decks. But let me know what you've been playing, what you've been liking, what your thoughts of the new standard are, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks for watching.